first thing people noticed about Sackles was his metal teeth, coated in steel. His long, sharp, silvery teeth always gleamed when he smiled. Sackles was an albino. His pink eyes and colorless skin looked slightly inhuman, especially on such a large, muscular body. I never saw him come out in the daytime. Perhaps the light hurt his eyes. He always wore trench coats and black jeans and boots. It appeared that he shaved all the hair on his head. It made his chalk-white skull seem to throb in the darkness like a mutated, fleshy egg. "That guy gives me the creeps, my girlfriend," Stacy said as she stared out the window of our trailer park, seeing him disappear down one of the side streets. Her chestnut-colored hair hung over her back in a French braid. Her dark eyes narrowed as she looked out into the night. "I think he gives us all the creeps," I said, shrugging and taking a sip of the steaming cup of coffee I held in my hand. "He walks around here every night, though. What can you do?" "You could get a gun," Stacy said, glancing over at me. I sighed. "I don't want a gun. They're dangerous," I said. "You're far more likely to accidentally shoot a family member than..." But my words were cut off by a blood-curdling scream from outside. I jumped. The coffee cup fell to the floor. I saw it tumbling, the burning liquid spilling out all over my legs and slippered feet. I gasped, stumbling back. "God damn it," I yelled, looking up at Stacy. Her face had gone pale as she continued to stare out the window. I saw her hands trembling, her fingers clenching into fists. Her eyes had widened to the size of dinner plates. I took a few stiff steps towards her, putting my hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" I hissed, looking out the window. I saw an old woman backpedaling away from a chubby man with cream-colored skin and silvery orbs for eyes. He hissed like some sort of rabid animal, showing the two long, curving vampiric teeth that stabbed out of his mottled, white gums. The old woman swung a heavy purse in front of her body over and over, shrieking in a cantankerous voice. Streams of blood flowed from bite marks on her neck and shoulder. Her white nightgown had become soaked in wet, crimson blotches that clung to her skinny, bony body. The man laughed, a sound like a freezing wind blowing through a graveyard. His voice echoed through the park, sounding raspy and diseased. "You are surrounded," he said in a thick accent. "Nowhere to run. Leave me alone," she yelled in a shivering voice. "Get away, you lunatic. I'm calling the cops." His hand shot out in a blur and grabbed her wrist. The snapping of bones reverberated down the street. I felt sick as I listened to her frantic shrieks fill the air. Shards of bone stabbed through the skin of her wrist. Her right hand nearly touched the back of her arm. Bright streams of arterial blood spurted from the destroyed limb. She raised her bloody hand in front of her face, staring at it in amazement and horror. I watched her fall back onto the concrete. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The vampiric abomination lunged forward in a blur. His long fingers came up, wrapping around her hair. He twisted her head back. She looked like a sheep waiting to be slaughtered. His curving fangs bit through the skin of her neck as her eyes rolled back in her head, and her screams faded to nothing. He drank. I ran around the trailer, locking all the doors and windows. Dark, skulking silhouettes passed by on all sides, hissing to each other in strange, foreign tongues. At that moment, the power cut out. They were plunged into total darkness. "Damn," I swore, stumbling into a table. Stacy was nearby, trying to get the police on the line. She held the cell phone close to her ear, whispering as if we were in a graveyard. After a few moments, I heard her murmuring words float through the shadows. "Yes, hello. My name is Stacy Kipman. We need help immediately. Somebody has been murdered outside. Send help to the Granite Pond Trailer Park, Unit 777. Her voice was cut off by the sound of shattering glass. She screamed. I heard the phone fall to the ground with a clatter. It landed screen up, and its dim light continued to allow me to see faintly across the room. Stacy's chalk-white face hovered in front of the smashed window. She choked, gagging and fighting. Wrapped around her neck, I saw a pale, emaciated arm with black, claw-like nails. A few moments later, I heard the locked front door break open with a single, powerful blow. Standing there stood Sackles, with his grinning, metal teeth silhouetted in the moonlight like a pale demon rising out of hell. Behind him loomed a dozen of those vampiric abominations, with eyes like pale moonlight. There were blacks, whites, and olive-skin complexions among the changed. A few vampiric women stood in the crowd, fresh blood dripping from their fangs. I even saw a little girl among the undead. Stacy's eyes bulged out of her head. She tried to scream, but the arm tightened around her throat, choking off her air. On the floor, I heard the faint voice of the 911 operator calling out from the other end from the cell phone. As Sackler stepped forward triumphantly, I knew we were doomed. I saw death in his cold gaze, and in his iron grin. Stacy gave a choked gasp. Tears streamed down her face. She silently sobbed, her back held tightly against the wall, as she faced down her doom. "Oh, I'm really sorry about all this," Sackler said disingenuously, his eyes flashing with amusement and excitement. "But I have a job to do, after all. The master says we must build an army, and, as a wise man once said, an army runs on its stomach." He gave a quick nod to his inhuman zealots. With a scream, Stacy disappeared out the window. I started to run toward her, my arm outstretched, but a pale blur zoomed across the room and tackled me. A large, thin vampire came loping around the front of the trailer, effortlessly dragging a struggling Stacy behind him. Stacy and I had our hands yanked behind our backs. We were dragged into the kitchen, where the grinning, stony faces of the monsters regarded us with bloodlust and hunger. "Okay, who gets these ones?" Sackler asked. In a bored tone, the little girl stepped forward, gnashing her teeth. A small rivulet of clear drool dripped from her tiny, pursed mouth. "I must eat. I haven't eaten yet tonight," she said in a thick Spanish accent. Sackler gave her a wide, toothy smile and motioned her forward. Her tanned skin looked like stone. Fangs protruded from her mouth like two deadly hypodermic needles. "Take the girl first," Sackler said, pointing at Stacy. "Her blood looks clear and pure. This one here probably tastes bitter and rancid." He grabbed me by the hair as he said it, roughly shoving my head to the side. "I'll take the scumbag after she finishes off the woman," a black vampire said, his shaved head gleaming in the dull moonbeam streaming in from the kitchen window. Their silvery eyes gave off a dim light that covered the room in a pale, ghostly glow. Like the girl, this man's skin looked solid and unyielding, as if it had turned into hard granite. He ran a long tongue over his fangs. It looked forked, like the tongue of a serpent. The vampiric girl lunged forward, running at Stacy in her excitement over the fresh meat struggling in front of her. Stacy screamed. She stood next to the sink, both her wrists pinned behind her back by a strong, muscular vampiric man. A man's pale face glittered with sadism as Stacy struggled to pull her slender wrist out of his iron grasp. She tried to kick backwards, aiming at his shins and knees, but he didn't even flinch. He bent her arms back, forcing her head down until Stacy was face to face with the girl. "Please don't hurt me," Stacy pleaded. I tried to fight against the vampire pinning my arms behind my back. He pushed my arms up. A stabbing pain ran through my body as I screamed in fury and agony. "Leave her alone, you sack of shit," I shrieked. Sackler gave me a sly wink. The little girl opened her mouth wide, far wider than seemed humanly possible, as if her jaw had unhinged like a snake's. A forked tongue flicked out. In a blur, her gaping black hole of a mouth snapped shut around Stacy's neck. She gave a choked gasp. Stacy's eyes rolled back in her head, the whites shining like cataracts. My screaming devolved into sobbing as twin crimson rivers flowed from the bite. A vampiric girl reminded me of an infant suckling on its mother's breasts. She gave happy grunts and soft moans of pleasure as she drank. At that moment, I knew we were both doomed. The eyes of the many vampires hung in the air like bright, silver galaxies spiraling in the void. In that moment, it felt like all of them were focused directly at me. My adrenaline was so high that the world seemed to shimmer a translucent white. I could feel my heart beating like a jackhammer. In the gloom of this living hell, no one noticed the silhouette sneaking in through the shattered trailer park door, especially not me in my sorrow and powerlessness. The attack from the figure came silently. An older Spanish man with a sharp scimitar sword held in his hand sprinted forwards. He was dressed in a coarse poncho with sharp, triangular patterns of black, orange, and white jutting through the middle. The curving blade gleamed in the dim light. As it soared towards the nearest vampire, it audibly whizzed through the air in a blur. The vampire, a pale, young woman, didn't even get the chance to turn around before her head flew off her body. As if in slow motion, I watched it soar across the room as spiraling gouts of blood flew from the neck. The eyes continued to shine, and the mouth continued to gnash the air even as it smacked hard into the wall, before landing on the wooden floor with a heavy crash. The vampire holding an unconscious Stacy dropped her hard to the floor with a loud growl, advancing forward toward this new threat. The little vampiric girl rose, turning her head towards the dangerous newcomer. Her fangs made a sucking sound when they pulled out of the skin. The other vampires had devolved into chaos. I felt my hands released as the one behind me rushed forward to attack the old man. Sackler's expression fell into a deep scowl. He pulled out an enormous black revolver from his inner coat pocket, aiming it at the old man's head. A gunshot rang out from the front of the house. I saw an old woman standing there with a rifle held in her hands. She was dressed similarly to the old man, wearing some sort of poncho that might have been at home in the Andes. Sackless gave a bloody gurgle before falling to the ground. An exit wound the size of an orange stuck out the back of his chest. I could see the tangled masses of mutilated organs and flesh held within. The laser sight quickly moved on to the next target, dancing over the head of a pale, young woman. The old man continued advancing on the vampires surrounding Stacy, striking at their necks. He ducked when they tried clawing him with their long, black talons. He moved like a much younger man, slipping through the crowd of monsters like a shadow. The old woman continued firing her rifle, dropping another 3 of the vampires. Stacy had started to regain consciousness. Her eyes fluttered, and she moaned softly. She crawled forward, pushing herself up slowly with her trembling hands. Then rivulets of blood continued to stream down her neck, staining her white shirt with crimson splotches. "Come on," the old man cried in a battle frenzy, as another vampire rushed him. He brought the blade straight down into the center of the vampiric man's skull. His head split open with a crunch of bones, and a blossoming explosion of gore and brains. "You too, it's time to go," he yelled at us. I didn't need any more encouragement than that. I ran over to Stacy, threading my arms under her shoulders before dragging her up. She staggered, putting out her hands before her like a blind person. I wrapped my arm around her and helped her stumble forward. The few remaining vampires had all retreated by this point. The little girl and a few others ran straight through the back door. It splintered into 100 tiny fragments as they smashed right through it without slowing. Within moments, they had faded into the night. "We have to find somewhere safe," the old man said in a thick Spanish accent. "There's more of them coming, but for now, we have a car waiting outside. We need to get you out of here before they show up." "Thank God," Stacy mumbled. Her pale face seemed haunted. Within her eyes, I saw what kind of nightmare she and I were trapped in reflected back at me. We found a black SUV with the headlights on parked in the middle of the street. The old man gestured me and Stacy to the back. He pushed his long, silvery hair back, pulling down the hood of the poncho. His face was covered in sweat. He went over to some bushes in my yard, wiping the blade of the scimitar off on the leaves, trying to clean away some of the foul, vampiric blood. Stacy collapsed in the back seat with a long sigh. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. She shivered in my grasp. Her body felt cold and small. The old man jumped into the driver's seat, and the old woman into the passenger seat. They kept their weapons next to them, continuously checking the rearview mirrors and the shadows of the forest nearby. Within seconds, the old man peeled out, heading out of the trailer park. We passed countless bodies drained of blood and left on the street like pieces of garbage. "Are you okay?" the old woman asked, turning her head to look back at us. Stacy nodded weakly. "I think so," she said. "She only got me for a couple seconds before you guys came in, I think. It hurts, though. It's like someone stabbed me in the neck." "They did stab you in the neck," I said. I turned to look the old woman in the eyes. The expression there seemed wise and peaceful. "I'm Jack, and this is Stacy. Thank you so much for saving us. I thought we were dead for sure. I'm Cristiano, and this is Maria," the old man said, his dark eyes constantly alert. As we swerved through the labyrinthine streets of the enormous trailer park, I could see the front entrance by now. Behind it, a single police car parked there with its lights silently flashing. The blue and red strobing made the shadows all around us jump and dance in eerie flashes. On the ground nearby, I saw the bodies of the 2 officers. Their pale faces stared up at the cloudless sky, their lips blue. Deep puncture marks on their necks dribbled clotted blood down their cold, dead flesh. "So much for the cops," I said. Cristiano nodded. "The police never did much in my country, either," he said. "The Vampiro do as they will, and pass where they will. The master has much money and power after all. He can buy the police and the government officials." I leaned forwards, interested. "Do you know what's going on here?" I whispered intently. "Do you know where these things came from?" He nodded grimly. "I've known of your friend, Sacklis, for quite a while. I knew he was involved in human trafficking rings. They move illegals across the US border for a price, or so they claim. Some of them do arrive, surely, but a lot of the illegals just disappear. The family members notice eventually, but who can they call? They don't know if they disappeared in Guatemala or in Mexico, or if they made it to the US after all, and then something happened to them. It's the perfect crime, yes? I nodded. Maria looked sickened. It is foul and evil, she said. They feed on everyone, the men, women, and children. The Vampiro do not discriminate. In fact, I think they prefer innocent blood, especially that of infants. Cristiano muttered darkly at this, making the sign of the cross. Anyway, the Vampiro worked their way up here, as they will over time. They got smuggled in at night the same way they move the illegals and cocaine. Perhaps the Vampiro trekked across the long, dark desert, or perhaps they were smuggled in the back of trucks, but regardless, they are here now, and the master wishes to expand his army. For many years, we kept this plague contained to the Andes, to the small villages hidden in the cracks of the mountains, but now it has spread far and fast. It was only last year we got the first reports of the Vampiro in Mexico, Maria said, and now they're up here. We came when we heard rumors of the planned attack. We captured, let's say, a spy. Our eyes glittered. He didn't want to talk, but after I brought out the pliers and the silver dagger, he was only too happy to scream his song of truth. We have a safe house nearby, Castellano said, a place owned by a sympathetic soul, let's say. There is a resistance forming all across the land, from Brazil to Texas. Indeed, many new souls have joined in the struggle, though for now, we fight in secret. We call ourselves the Servants of the Iron Cross, and until the Vampiro declares itself publicly, neither will we. We pulled into the dirt driveway of the house. The lights were all on, the yellow light shining through the windows like a jack-o'-lantern. The lawn looked perfectly manicured. A quaint, wooden fence surrounded the house. Beyond it, the land sloped downwards into thick woods. Yet we weren't nearly far enough away from the trailer park or the vampires for my peace of mind. Stacy continuously glanced behind her, but the wounds on her neck had stopped bleeding, and she seemed to be regaining some of her strength. Cristiano led the way, unlocking the front door and flinging it open. He called out as we entered, a bedraggled, ragtag group. "Hello," he cried, but the house stayed as silent as death. We walked through the front hallway. I noticed the ancient statues lining expensive mahogany tables on each side. I leaned close to one, seeing a Mayan god. It showed a slithering serpent with feathers and wings. Room by room, we searched the house. It was, indeed, totally empty. Maria took us upstairs. She slipped a silver key out of her pocket, unlocking an enormous wooden cabinet in the master bedroom. Behind it, I saw lines of pistols, rifles, shotguns, and grenades. Boxes of ammo were stocked on the top shelf, thousands of rounds sorted by caliber, and piled to the very top of the 8-foot-high cabinet. "You guys better take something," Maria said, her eyes gleaming as she looked at the weapons. She ran her wrinkled fingers over the scope of a rifle, a faint smile playing on the corners of her lips. "The Vampiro are spreading, and they will surely hunt us all down before long. Nowhere is safe. We must stand and fight. There are, after all, worse things than death." We had gone around the safe house, locking all the doors and checking all the windows. Stacy and I had both taken shotguns and loaded them with slugs. I wasn't very accurate with a gun anyway at longer ranges, and Stacy had only fired a gun once. I hoped that would be enough. I explained to her about loading slugs in the chamber, racking it, and how to turn the safety on and off. I knew a single hit from a slug would rip through flesh like butter, and I hoped the extra firepower would compensate for our lack of experience somewhat. I loaded 5 slugs into the Bentley. We had filled our pockets with extra ammunition. It wasn't long before I heard the hissing from in front of the house. It floated through the air like a death knell. Cristiano gave a panicked shout from where he kept watch near the window. "We have company," he screamed. "Get ready." I ran over to the window, with Stacy by my side. Cristiano had his sword sheathed around his waist. Slung around his shoulder, he held an M16, the laser sight flicked on and ready to aim. Shotguns. Good. You can use the slugs to shoot through walls." "Really?" I asked, feeling the terror and uncertainty of the few moments before a deadly battle. I felt like I would crawl right out of my skin. Cristiano nodded. "When they get near, you and her start shooting through the walls," he said, "especially the front door. They'll hit there, and the windows, Maria, and I will shoot at them from the sides. Now go, secure the front door." As I ran past, I glanced out the window. In the front of the pack, I saw Sackler's. Blood still covered his shirt, but the wound had sealed over with some black, scab-like growth. His eyes glowed silver, the light spiraling and whirling in hypnotic currents. Behind him, I saw a few dozen of the monstrosities standing tall and fearless. They formed a triangle with the majority in the back. "Come out, Cristiano," Sackler's yelled. You have been a worthy opponent, and for that, I will give you a quick death. You have killed many of my comrades, Cristiano, but the master is forgiving. And yet, if we have to come in, you will die screaming. We can make it last. Cristiano, we can stretch it out for you. I watched this intense exchange through the small window at the top of the front door. Sackless hissed the last sentence, his twin metal fangs protruding out of his mouth like the teeth of a rattlesnake. Go to hell, Maria shouted from the left front window on the bottom floor. She fired her gun, scattering the vampires. They all ran at once towards the front of the house. Sackless called out commands. In a low, guttural voice, Cristiano started shooting, emptying his clip as fast as he could into the crowd. Get the windows, Sackless cried to those behind him. We'll take the door. Within seconds, Sackless and 8 or 9 others were rushing towards me. And Stacy, I felt my hands shaking as I nodded at her. It's time, I said. Get ready to start shooting. I love you, she whispered as a tear slipped from her eye. If we die, her words were cut off as the door shuddered in its frame. More powerful blows rained down on it from the other side. I inhaled deeply before putting the Benelli point blank against the wood and firing. I quickly emptied all 5 rounds through the door. Stacy fired through the side window, her pale, sweaty face shining in the light. I heard screaming from outside, a tormented, gurgling death cry that ripped its way out of the abomination's throats. I peered through the window. As I reloaded, seeing 3 of the vampires had giant holes torn into their faces and chests. Sackless still stood, though, and with a final, powerful kick, he sent the hole-ridden door flying open. It smacked me hard in the face. I saw white stars for a few moments while I stumbled back, nearly falling. I slammed the back of my head hard against the wall, sliding down as Stacy screamed, Maria, and Cristiano came running over, firing as dozens of vampires streamed in the open door, and others crawled through the windows. More smashing came from the back of the house. I knew at that moment that we were surrounded. As Stacy frantically tried to reload her gun, Sackless raised a bone-white hand, black talons ripping out of the ends of his fingers. He swiped it hard across Stacy's arms, leaving 4 deep gouges in her skin, and sending the gun flying. She gave a cry of surprise and pain. I groaned, my head swimming as I tried to rise to my feet. I still held the gun loosely in one hand. I was seeing double, and felt warm blood streaming down the back of my scalp. No, Cristiano yelled as a vampire jumped on his back. He fired quickly at those surrounding him, blowing holes through their blackened hearts and cold, smiling faces. The one on his back sunk its teeth into his neck. I saw Cristiano slow down as his screams faded. With a crash, they fell together to the ground. Like a lamprey stuck to a fish, the vampire held on, drinking his blood as Cristiano stopped struggling. Don't kill him, Sackless yelled. I want him to suffer first. He turned to Stacy, grinning like a skull. I pulled the trigger, hitting another vampire in the chest as he ran in the front door. But Sackless still stood, totally unharmed. He unhinged his jaw and lunged forward, biting deeply into Stacy's neck. A hand fell down on my shoulder. I jumped, seeing Maria. Her eyes looked like a panicked animal's. In each hand, she held a grenade. It's too late for us, she said, motioning to the smashed window. My husband is dead. I will take these monsters out before I die, though. Now get out. Run. I glanced back, seeing Stacy's blue lips and dilated pupils. I knew she was dead, and I jumped through the window, landing hard in the yard. I had dropped the gun in the panic of the moment. As I sprinted across the yard, an explosion rocked the earth. I looked back, seeing a pillar of flame rising high into the sky. A shockwave seemed to travel through the air, rattling my bones and stealing my breath away. The eye of the flame danced higher, a swirling, red cyclone that spiraled into the sky. I heard screaming from the house now, many hissing, gurgling voices joined in as more vampires died in the inferno. I didn't know where to go. I stumbled through the dark streets for a long time, my head pounding. Tears streamed from my eyes as I thought about Stacy's death. After a few hours, I saw headlights streaming down the hills in the distance. It looked like a caravan of cars, and SUVs were on their way into town. I started running towards them, hoping that the cavalry had finally arrived. I thought I heard footsteps matching mine. I glanced back, seeing nothing but shadows. Yet after a few seconds, I was sure of it. Someone was following me. I stopped, looking back. In the shadows on the side of the road, I saw 2 figures. One of them had metal teeth and glowing eyes, and next to him stood Stacy, her wounds fully healed, her skin like stone. The light shone from both of their eyes now. The SUVs and cars sped toward me, their headlights parting the dark night. The two figures retreated back into the forest as dozens of government agents in black suits stepped out, rushing towards me. After seeing Stacy's ultimate fate, I thought back to earlier in the night when Maria had said there are, after all, worse things than death, and now I know she was right.